Hello, everybody. Welcome. So I've been listening to Essentia Foundation podcasts, orbiting the topic of quantum foundations. It's a broad topic, but a specialized one as well. And there's a bunch of presuppositions that have dominated human theoretical concern for some time now. It's not important for me to say exactly what that time frame is, but it certainly begins around the time that Max Planck and Schrödinger and Einstein and Bohr and many others began to, there were certain discoveries that were, earth-shattering, and one might say we haven't come to grips with their implications. But this would be to put things backwards, right? This would be to say that the grips we have precedence to phenomena, and they don't. They just straight up don't. And there's a fundamental, really weird supposition that underlies much of modern science and thought, conception, theorization, testing, experiment, and so forth. And this is the idea that there is an objective reality, something out there is happening. This is a psiontic perspective. And or B, we can't know what's happening. What we can have are ways of thinking about what's happening and talking about them and perhaps testing them and so forth. This is a psi-epistemic. By the way, that psi is in psionic. Its psi is in the Greek letter psi. I don't actually yet understand why that letter is used. So there's a couple of serious problems here. And the first one is that knowledge is different from phenomena. Knowledge occurs in a human representational context. That context is intimately related to that which is, has been, or shall be existence, and has effects on it, and is affected by it, but they're not the same thing. So there are people who rather justifiably assert that our mind and senses and so forth are like an interface that filters out most of what's going on to produce coherent fictions. There's some truth to this. There's some truth to most of the perspectives that are taken and many of the arguments that are made. The problem for me is fundamental, and quantum physics suggests that something like my perspective is happening, which is that observations affect a transtemporal manifold of relationships, such that one could propose, though I wouldn't, that they go back in time and change features of origin, which instantaneously change states in, for example, two entangled photons. And this requires a concept that is different from the transmission and reception of information. There is something resembling communication going on between the entangled particles, such that if you measure one spin up, the other one will always be found to be spin down. And obviously, if they're, a galaxy apart or whatever, there's no way to transmit information. And the humans think that the only way to transmit information, or to transform the character of connected elements, right, entangled elements, is that there has to be communication between them, but there doesn't. And the reason there doesn't is that the physical layer affects the layer of origin, so that actions here are communicated there and then reach back from there to affect transformations in the physical layer. Also in the representational layer, because that depends on memory. So for me, in the dandelion model, the toy, where you have these layers, origin, registers of a sphere, concentric sphere in this toy, for ease of thought experiments. You have the core, which is origin. And origin isn't the beginning. It's not someplace backwards in time. It's always now. And then you have the next layer, which is the impossible in this toy. The next layer out, or in, if you invert this, is the possible, and then the probabilistic, and then the semi-deterministic, and then the physical, and then the representational, and at least for humans, also the mechanical. Now, any transformation in the physical or mechanical layer is instantaneously communicated to origin. All beings are thereby transformed in some sense by the transformation in the physical. And then the opposite process ensues, where those transformations radiate outward instantaneously into the physical. There's no communication involved. What's involved is that the entirety of the context is collapsing to origin and expanding back to the appearance of physical distinction at an unimaginable rate. A rate that's probably faster with each iteration by orders of magnitude. And I would suggest that there's something that's faster than instantaneous. Because there's a time-free context just below or above where we usually think. So for me, this it gives me a way of understanding these kinds of phenomena without having to worry about the distance between the two entangled photons. Because fundamentally, at origin, they are the same thing, right? They are the same feature of origin in in the origin register. All things are the same feature in the origin register, and then they differentiate across the registers as the dandelion expands toward the physical and contracts back toward origin. So this is one toy. But there doesn't have to be communication for there to be shared characteristics or even polarized characteristics. No communication is necessary. Communication is a classical idea. So there's that. But there's a much worse problem, which is that all of these theories seem to imply, like they have as an axiom, often an unspoken axiom, that humans are separate from the phenomenon they observe. And this seems wildly unlikely to me. This is a fiction of preference that has become embedded as a dogmatism in science. You see, the problem is that observations affect observers. So, if an observer is an extension of origin and you transform something in the observer, let's say they make a measurement, that changes the observer, it changes origin, it changes everything. Now, the change may be, it may appear from human temporal and size perspectives to be incredibly minute, maybe even infinitesimal. That doesn't matter. The problem is that there are no observers that are separate from the phenomena they observe. There are no observers that exist outside of existence, right? There's no way to make a cut between the observer and the phenomena. And science, realists, they presuppose this separation, right? We find that we can't observe phenomena without disturbing it, quote unquote, especially at, Planck length and wavelength of the photon and so forth, which is obvious why that might be true. To observe phenomena, you have to sort of disturb them. Right, you have to shoot an electron at them or something, right? And so that disturbs what's called the stage. Then we have a variety of methods for what are known as less disturbing measurement methods, where we get some information but not all that we'd want. And we have problems where if you run experiment A first, you get a reliable result, but if you run experiment B first, the result of experiment A changes. And this is inexplicable according to how we prefer to think about separation, events, contexts, and so forth. But the dangerously wrong supposition is that the observer is somehow in a privileged position
Well, that's more disturbing than I'd like to think about.
Sorry, I'm being distracted by the my observations of humans and their observations of me. Right. Now, humans are observation oriented. If this isn't obvious, just look at what we call social media. We're deeply affected by being observed, particularly by negative observation or positive observation. But that's not really relevant to what I'm trying to talk about here today. So what I'm trying to talk about here today is that you can't make any observations that don't change you. And what this means, in a sense, is that there are different kinds of entanglement at different layers of reality, or registers of reality. The human minds, they form something very similar to a transcendental network, and changes in that network affect all humans. Locality matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. So I think what I'm trying to get at here is that the idea that a separate human observes phenomena and then can tell you what's going on, right? Or what happened, or what is real or what is true. This is nonsensical. There's a scope, there's a reasonable scope in which such things are true-ish. But the idea of a phenomena that's true for all observers, right, an objective phenomena, is nonsensical. And has to be produced through a series of contortions of thought and identity and nature that are not fundamentally true, right? It's not possible for two, in so much as we understand it, due to relativity and light cones and so forth, it's formally impossible for two human beings to have the same experience at the same time. And the reason is that the human being is not just the wavefront you see in front of you. It's light cone, right? And not just its light cone, but the light cones that are related to it, both by distance and by locality. I've often made the claim that there are forms of distance that are closer than if you were the same thing. And the problem with entanglement is an exemplar of this principle, right? If you measure an entangled photon, or let's say, anything that could have spin up or spin down, in one location, instantaneously, apparently, the other entangled particle acquires the quality opposite. Now, the degree to which this is testable by Earth people is minimal. But the idea is that the basic idea is that modern science orbits has two flaws. The first is that objectivity exists. There are no objective observers, and you cannot produce one. What you can do is you can shave off enough of the irreconcilable novelty of existence to produce repeatable results. You can do that. And the other problem is that everything is being generated by origin moment to moment, and it's collapsing into origin and expanding from origin, at least in the toy that I've composed. And so there's no real such thing as a merely local effect or merely local characteristic. In this sense, the only thing resembling objectivity is to take various sums over the registers of the dandelion. That wouldn't be true objectivity. Be more like voting in a way, but I think the thing that surprised me this morning was just realizing suddenly for the first time there are no observers that are not affected by their observations. And the effect in the observer is profoundly complex. It's not simply that, I measure this stick and find that it's, X point, X length long and weighs this and appears to be comprised of wood. That's not the effect in the observer. The effect in the observer is a reorganization of history, future, and attention that can be quite dramatic when compared to, the simple data from the measurement. So measurements affect measurers. And what if this, quote, collapse of the wave function is not the wave function collapsing at all? What it is the myriad connections between origin and the physical layer as they leak into origin and leak back out into the physical layer. So what's collapsing is something like the identity, the distinct identity of an observer, some observables in a moment in linear time, that is collapsing in a non-formalizable way. Right? So it's not the wave function that collapses, it's everything. And it doesn't really collapse. Actually, it's kind of breathing. So this was one of my little mind storms this morning that I still find very provocative. I'm still digesting the implications of this. There's some second bookmark here. Which I hopefully will come to momentarily, but for now, I'm just going to take a reflective moment so that we don't have a long silence in the recording. Well, that only took a few seconds. All right, so there's a bunch of presumptions that underlie human conceptual thought, and they're not exactly natural to our experience. What they're natural to is the ways of thinking we've been imprinted with and scripted with since childhood. And most of these ways of thinking are not merely wrong, they're impossible. They're formally untrue. And they're not mere fictions because they limit our capacity to experience the depth and nature of our existence. And the humans are very bonded, not just to their lexicon of categories, right? These are the nominata signs that we link to phenomena in representational cognition. So, for example, in RepCog there is a Stellar's J here. Whatever is actually here is nothing like a token or a name. It's the entire universe appearing through an aperture, a series of apertures, as the form and interiority of the being that is before me. And that being is all beings, localized as this kind of being here. So the humans are very married to these fictions of category. And they believe them to be authoritative to such a degree that they structure what we will become aware of and what we will ignore, how we will become aware, the forms of awareness we bring to experience. So this leads to the problem that we have with a relatively new entry in the category tree, the categorical lexicon that humans use, moderns use. And this particular token is being called the phenomenon. It's a really interesting thing. Because it doesn't refer to all phenomenon, right? Or all phenomena. It refers primarily to non-ordinary phenomena. And suddenly these have all been captured by a single term, with UFOs at the top of the pyramid, essentially. Astral travel, telepathy, mind sight, remote viewing, non-ordinary healing modalities, non-ordinary sensing modalities, non-ordinary experiences. And the problem is, with this, a problem, is firstly that if you collect a bunch of disparate stuff together under one rubric, you're very likely to deceive yourself by trying to determine what's going on, right? And when the humans ask questions about what's going on, what they want is a single valued answer. Oh, it's this. Okay. Aha. This is what it was all along. But as I'm fond of saying, outside of certain reasonable limits of scope, no one has the slightest idea. Not no one. I have some ideas. But most people have no idea what anything is. They cannot explain the existence of a stone. They don't know why there are leaves, what those are, insects, organisms. Are fundamentally, all of this stuff is only ordinary within the confines of our lexicons, right? In point of fact, there are no ordinary phenomena at all. There are sort of registers of ordinariness and non-ordinariness, which are not determined by the phenomena. They're determined by our take on them, right? So at the register of simple truths, I don't have a fork in my hand right now. Okay? That's factual, right? And I can ask, what is a fork? And as long as I stay in very simplistic terrain, I can get reliable answers. But if I start asking questions about forkness, right, or objectness, it gets very sticky beyond like one or two simple registers. And by sticky, I mean irreconcilable. So the first thing I want to make clear is that there are no ordinary phenomena. And weirdly, the closest thing to ordinary phenomena, from one perspective, which basically violates most of the important principles that should not be violated, are machines. And machines incline us to expect that things are distinct, have parts, they're dead inside. The parts, have a stable function and structure. None of this is true in nature. It's just not there, right? And the humans love, especially scientists and reductionists and so forth, they love to compare things to a machine. We're looking for the building blocks of life because life is a machine. There's no chance of that being true. That's wild insanity. And it misfoots every other way of thinking. If you get something that foundational wrong, you can't think. You're going to be wrong every time you make a move. And you'll get dumber every time you make a move. Because you'll defend that inviolate presupposition that your entire ontology and epistemology is orbiting. And this is what we experience in modernity. So the insight that I had earlier, which I think is really important, is that if I limit the phenomena just to what we call UFOs, right? There's a bunch of branches. Yeah, there's intentional acts by technological societies to experiment with the effect of this idea on populations in a kind of psyop-y way. There are misidentifications, there are hallucinations, there are phenomena that we don't have a category for, which, once again, I've said really is all phenomena. All phenomena. But there's a much weirder possibility, which is that the universe is so vastly more strange than anything we can conceive of, that when we witness or experience or participate in events that violate our category tree, which, let me be clear, is incredibly primitive in the derogatory sense, right? It's stupidifying. So, something comes along and violates our category tree, and we get really excited, and we think, oh, well, if we just had more information, we could fit it into an existing category. No. There's nothing you can fit into an existing category, except in the relatively trivial register where you've arranged the context, the variables, yourself, your participation in them, and so forth, in such a fashion that you can, derive reproducible results. Fundamentally, time-space is something like pure novelty floating in structure, the appearance of structure. So, suppose that UFOs proper, right, and I'm going to distinguish this, what I want to point at is different from the relatively likely, in my view, possibility that beings from other planets, right, beings from the physical layer, using something resembling physical technologies, have visited the Earth. It seems quite likely to me. But that's not what I mean. There's some slice of the UFO phenomenon that probably correlates with this. But what I'm talking about is something much weirder, which is a localization of the actual nature's, characters, origins, and purposes of the universe itself. And this would naturally be category violating, and would not merely be category violating, each experience of this would have very unique features, right? And so that humans have claimed, well, these things are like trickstery. They show up to these people like this. They show up to those people like that. Sometimes they clown around. Sometimes they're threatening. Sometimes they do experiments on people or whatever, right? But what if we've got it backwards, such that the continuity of identity of a phenomena that we expect from our common experience in the physical layer is backwards, right? And everything is non-ordinary. And so when you see time-space reach a finger down from the sky toward Earth, it definitely doesn't fit in any ordinary category, and it would uniquely violate the categories, not just in any given event, but in every perceiver, because they're entangled with that phenomena, and in their experiences, and in the between of the observers, right? It would be unique in all of these things. So a phenomenon like that, you're never going to grasp it. It's ungraspable. It's foundationally ungraspable. You can relate with it, but figuring out what it is, you will never succeed, because it is not a what. And what you are and what it is are the same thing. You're just incapable of seeing from this perspective with your ordinary habits of categorization, thinking, rationality, and so forth. Participation is full-on available to you. Derivation, you will fail. There's no, this is the way, one of the ways we do the derivation is just to say, oh, it's non-ordinary. Right? Or, oh, it's part of the phenomenon. I may return in a bit. It's time for meditation. So try to imagine with me that anything that's partially superpositional, and everything is partially superpositional, it's a matter of degree, but if you encountered something that was much more superpositional than what you're commonly used to, then quite naturally it would not fit in any category. It would, quote, violate categories. Right? If your position is that the categories are the thing that has precedence. And so when humans encounter UFOs, a bunch of different things are going on, but one of the things that is probably going on is that they're encountering something that is superpositional. So it's not fully present here, right? It's mostly present in the blur over all beings and situations, and it's partially localizing. And so a phenomenon like that definitely will not fit into a familiar category. It will not be a this or a that, a them or an us, right? A being or a machine, a hallucination or an existing, regularly existing phenomenon. And so the humans are extremely confused about these matters, and they seem to like to think that the category lexicon they use, which is catastrophically primitive, useful in certain registers of our experience, lethally blinding in many others. They don't like it when anything draws that into question, because they're identified with it. They can't really tell the difference between themselves and their category lexicon, even though they don't know what they are. They know they're human, they're a man, they're a woman, they're a person of indeterminate gender, or, however they may envision themselves. But these are just adoptions or rejections of category. They don't play in the waters beyond those very primitive structures in cognition. But everything else is only playing in those waters, and mostly doesn't play in the representational register that the humans have confused reality with. Right? So if you see something and you don't know what it is, a good first step is to realize that it may not be knowable. It may not be the kind of thing of which, representational knowledge can inform you, except to a very minimal degree by giving it some token that we associate with it. There are phenomena whose fundamental nature is catastrophically novel. It's not just one kind of thing. It's 15 kinds of transforming things and 7,000 others. Right? And in point of fact, there are no phenomena that are not like this, except in language. In language, static, forever identities obtain. All trees are trees. No trees are non-trees, right? The Aristotelian syllogism structure. So these are some of my thoughts today. I'm grateful for this time together. This is a rather casual recording. I may or may not post it, but
There's more pansies. More pansies been painted.
I'm happy to have this time to explore these ideas, and I hope you may find some liberation or insight from them. Thank you for joining me. I wish you beautiful ways and peaceful moments, and I look forward to learning together again very soon. Bye-bye for now.